The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is Conscience, Evangelicalism, and Home.
Good evening, everyone. I was sitting here so relaxed, I forgot to move myself into the studio. Well, it's a beautiful summer in many parts of the Northern Hemisphere. We're certainly enjoying it here where I'm at in Wisconsin. Beautiful weather. I hope you're enjoying the summer as well. And thank you for taking some time out to join us here on Creating the Image of God. As we always do, we have a guest that I'm sure you're going to just really enjoy and also learn a lot from. His name is Mark Galli, and he has a very interesting background. Primarily, we reached out to him because of his time at Christianity Today, which is one of the major magazines that has shaped, maybe that's an overstatement, but that has been a staple of evangelical thought in America and beyond, both from beyond evangelical and also perhaps beyond America. But Mark has an interesting background. He's an American Catholic writer, editor, but a former Protestant pastor, best known for that leadership at Christianity Today, where he served in various roles, culminating in 7 years as editor-in-chief. He moved from the Presbyterian ministry into evangelical Anglicanism before returning to the Catholic Church in 2020. He's written widely on a variety of topics, and the book titles are very interesting: Jesus, Mean and Wild, Beyond Smells and Bells, God Wins, Chaos and Grace, and an introductory biography on Karl Barth for Evangelicals. Let's welcome Mark into the studio.
Good to be here, Wade. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. I think some guests end up on the show quicker. Some have a little bit of a longer path. I think we started talking months ago and been really looking forward to this episode. So, Mark, as we always do in this show, we like to get to know the real you, meaning what's your creation story? What were the forces that shaped you before you took conscious thought to take control of your own destiny in life? Who were your parents? Where were you born? Just give us a little bit about the background about Mark when he was, a very young boy, and what was that like for you?
Well, my parents were second-generation immigrants, basically. My mother comes from a Russian family that immigrated here in the 20s and 30s. She wasn't born in Russia, but her brothers and sisters were. My father's family is German and Italian. His mother came from Germany in the 20s and 30s. I don't know the exact dates. So as part of my consciousness is that I have this, I'm half Russian, a quarter Italian, and a quarter German. So that shaped me in ways that I'm not quite understanding. I mean, I do get kind of moody like Russians do. When I read Russian novels, I go, oh, yeah, I recognize all that. What's going on? That craziness. In fact, I first read The Brothers Karamazov right after my mother died, and as I read it and read about the four brothers, I could quickly identify the Russian character in some of her relatives very, very quickly. It was obvious that she was Russian. Her family was Russian. I feel less so about the German and Italian. In fact, but what's interesting about the only person I talked to about their life before coming to America was my grandmother, my German grandmother. And when I would try to ask her questions about what it was like in Germany, she would just say, "Why do you want to go back there? That things were so hard back then." She wouldn't just simply wouldn't want to talk about it. We're in America now, and we're Americans. That was very clear to her. So um, that shaped me in some way. I was baptized a Catholic because I think because of probably my German grandmother's insistence. My Russian grandmother was a Baptist. She spoke hardly any English at all. But my German grandmother was kind of a dominating figure in her family, and my religion wasn't that important to my dad or my mom at the time. So I'm pretty sure because of her pressure, I was baptized as a Catholic, and I took First Communion. But to be honest, I don't remember the Catholic Church hardly at all during that period. It was mere formality, really.
Couple of quick questions about this part of your life. So my assumption would be perhaps that your grandmother was from southern Germany because, you've sort of got a lot of Protestants in the north and the Catholics more in the south. Don't know if that's true. Do you know where in Germany she was from?
No, so here's the funny thing. One of the contradictions of my life is that I have had little to no interest in finding about my family's history, but I majored in history in college. I love church history and history in general. I love reading about history everywhere else except my own personal family. I'm not, and I've never
Well,
quite unwrapped why that's not interesting to me, and all this other history is.
Well, I was thinking, those forces do shape us. And thinking about your German grandmother, and I don't know if I shared with you, I spent 10 years in Germany and Switzerland, and I was there in the 80s. There were still many people, and I was serving in pastoral roles, so working with a lot of older people who had, been there during Hitler's time. They may have been, young kids or teens or even in their 20s and 30s, because in the 80s I was dealing with people, in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And the Germans have this word Vergangenheitsbewältigung, right, which means dealing with the past. So whereas you have this deep, moody Russian psyche that goes way back, with the Germans, it's different. A lot of it is in the wake of World War II and that shattering realization of what they had done. But when I was in Germany, I never met a German, literally never met a single German who would admit to having known anything, anything, not
Huh.
even the slightest bit. It was always consistently 100%. We didn't know anything, which is not true. It's not true that nobody knew anything about what
Yeah,
was going on.
yeah, yeah.
And then you have, to me, the quintessential German movie is Das Boot, which you may know of. It's the one about the submarine, and it goes like this: everybody dies and the hero commits suicide, right? And there's this other German movie about kind of like The Fugitive, where this woman's trying to escape, and at the end she's climbing up this fire escape long ladder, and she's got this white dress, and she's about to get away at the end of this movie, right? And you've been watching her try to, with her struggles, and try to get away. But rather than, in an American movie where maybe she would get away, of course she doesn't get away. She's about to get away, but then her heel breaks. She's got heels on, and her shoe falls and she slips. And they show her tumbling through the air with this white flowing dress flowing. It's a very kind of beautiful, tragic scene. But then they don't just stop. They follow her all the way down to the pavement, splat. And that's when it
Wow.
ends. That's how the movie ends. But then that's not enough. They keep showing that over and over again through the credits, right?
Oh, wow.
So my thought is that, your grandmother saying, "Why do you want to know about the past?" Not wanting to talk about it. Maybe some of that is partly why, you just
Yeah,
said,
now that I think about the timeline, I'm sure she moved here before the Nazi era. It would be the 20s, because she was married to my grandfather, and he started a grocery store in the late 20s. And during the Depression, one of the family memories is that he would often give groceries to people, and they would promise to pay, but they couldn't pay, and that eventually
yeah.
led him to bankruptcy. So she might have a memory of the Weimar Republic, which was an insanely chaotic time, massive inflation, all sorts of things.
Yeah, but Hitler, I was just looking it up, and this was my recollection. He joined the German Workers' Party in 1919. By 33, he was chancellor. So in the late 20s, he would have already been, taking advantage of that.
Well, his rise was pretty rapid after 1930. I don't think it was,
True, true.
yeah. So I don't think that maybe the memory of World War One played into her memory
Yeah.
bank, which was tragic enough in and itself. And
Well,
then
but
the
but the
massive,
discontent that would have given rise to Hitler was what she was experiencing.
maybe, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had First Communion, but I don't remember us attending Catholic churches at all during that period. Um, and was pretty a-religious, or I don't remember having religious thoughts or reading the Bible or praying or my mother praying with me. That just wasn't part of our routine. And it wasn't until my mother had a very fervent evangelical sister who was plaguing her all the time about becoming a Christian, accepting Jesus. And at some point, my mother, she had a very rough life. At this point, she had freed herself from alcoholism for the most part, but she'd had a period of just drinking and had to get through that. So she comes at, she has my older brother is 7 years older than me, and she had a big fight with him. He was, I guess he'd already graduated from high school, was going to junior college. I don't remember the exact deals, but she was so frustrated with him. She prayed, Lord, if you will send him into the army, I will become a Christian. He came back that afternoon and said, Mom, I've joined the Air Force. So the next time Billy Graham was on TV, and Billy Graham said, kneel before the television, said, if you want to accept Christ, she did it. And then in our family, when my mom did something, everybody did it. Not necessarily my dad, but everyone else. She was a force of nature. So we started attending an evangelical church, an evangelical free church specifically. And that was my first introduction to things religious. And it was we had Bible studies in her home every night. She thought that's what Christians do. I only found out later that hardly anybody, no Christians have a Bible study with their family every night.
Right.
But she was there with her cigarettes and her coffee, and me and my brother and my cousin who was living with us at the time, and went through the Gospel of John. I remember being struck by the verse, Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. I remember being struck with, For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Combining that with attending Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening prayer meetings. It was an amazing 6 or 7 months. And when Christmas rolled around, I decided I'm not going to feel guilty, because the pastor there was very good at making one feel guilty about something, and encouraged everyone to either raise their hands to confess, to make a recommitment, or to become a Christian. And I felt really guilty every Sunday. So I said, I don't want to feel guilty at Christmas. So when he made the altar call on December 19th, this is the one thing about being an evangelical, is that you can date the time and the date of your conversion, It was December 19th, close to noon. He said, anyone who want to become a Christian, raise your hand. I thought that would be the end of it, because that was usually the way he ended it. But then he said, I'm going to do something different today. I'm going to have you all come forward.
This was after you raised your hand?
So I went forward. We went into the bride's room. I remember specifically, knelt down it's very vivid, knelt down at these metal folding chairs with an elder. And he recited the Jesus prayer for me, the Jesus conversion prayer, and I repeated it, and I was just in tears. And as I look back on that, I don't think it was tears of repentance, I think it was a psychological release is what it was, because of all those months of building up to that, and just knowing that this was what we did now as a family, or as we, and but here's so I later look at it as mostly a psychological motive and a psychological experience. But here's the mystery to me that I cannot explain. After that time, it never occurred to me not to be a Christian and try to be a Christian. I'd made a commitment. It wasn't like I'd made a commitment, I'm going to stick with it. It was like that was a turning point, that from that point on I was a Christian, and before that I wasn't. The world I was in was an evangelical Christian, so it meant trying to understand and live my life in that way. Even though I look back on it as less than a spiritual experience and more of a psychological one. So I think that's really interesting, the way God works in our lives. He'll take the most odd circumstances and use that as a way to shape us and move us toward Him. So that was a very, obviously, extremely important part of my youth. 13. They've done studies in the evangelical world, especially about when people make decisions for Christ. It's amazing the number of people that have made a decision for Christ when they're junior high, right when their mind is completely in chaos, their body's in chaos. They make this fundamental decision that many of them stick with forever.
Well, I remember
Another great
reading this
mystery to me.
book by William Sargant. I don't know if you know it, The Battle for the Mind. It's a seminal book of a physiology of conversion and brainwashing, how evangelists, psychiatrists, politicians, and medicine men can change your beliefs and behavior. And it goes into the methods and means of brainwashing and those deep conversion experiences. So I think, you're not wrong to talk about psychological release, and that was a part of it. And I remember this was an important book to me because when I was in college, I was writing a paper about, and we will want to get into exactly what the paper was about, but I was going through my own conversion experience. I was reflecting on my own childhood and all this. So, we're fearfully and wonderfully made is kind of my comment on, right? That we're not just this or just that or just that. You follow me?
Yeah. Well, I tend to react against the word of brainwashing.
Sure,
Because
that was
there's a
his
fine
name.
line between brainwashing and influencing people. Whenever you influence people, you are one of the areas you are trying to shape is their mind.
Right.
So to summarize a lot of this activity as brainwashing strikes me as reducing it to something that is something much more complex and mysterious than that.
No, what he was doing was showing the parallels of he studied into literally methods of brainwashing, getting people to believe things against their will and against, what they had been grown up with or whatever,
Yeah.
malevolent efforts to literally brainwash people. But he was showing how some of these things are common in other spheres of belief.
Right.
You follow me? So
Right. And I suppose the difference, and I'd be interested in talking about this at some other point, but against your will. That's a
right.
phrase you just used. Now, for example, I can only relate to my experience. I can see where one from the outside can look, well, you were just immersed in a kind of a cultish subculture, and you were drawn to do something that you didn't really believe in. But that was not the experiencing going on inside my heart.
Right.
I felt very much I was free. And I look back on the experience and feel like, no, that was a decision I made in freedom, but deeply influenced by the culture I was a part of,
Yeah.
by the Bible I was reading, by my fervent prayers of my mother, and etc. So,
Yeah. So, from then on, you were a Christian through and through. What were the steps that you took? What was your path? Let's say, what trajectory were you on prior to that? And then how did that change for you?
well, I just saw my identity as a person who was committed to following Jesus Christ. So what that first meant for an adolescent mindset was I needed to be a good person according to the teachings of Jesus in the Bible. It was mainly about being good and avoiding sin. And And that, of course, becomes a dead end pretty quickly because it's all about striving to do something you actually don't have the power to do to be consistently good, and then guilt at the fact that you aren't that way.
That was
There
me at
was somewhere,
19 for sure. Yeah.
and somewhere in high school, I met a friend who exuded for me Christian welcome and Christian graciousness and a warmth that made me realize that the greatest commandment is not about what I should do and not do, but it's to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that was a pretty transformative recognition that it wasn't about following rules, but it was about trying to learn and immerse oneself in a life of love of God and love of others, which includes, yeah, a few commandments you have to obey, but you do them out of love and not out of because it's your duty or the right thing to do. I also had an experience in college where, well, somewhere along the way, I decided I wanted to become either a teacher or a minister. And then in college, I thought I should be a minister. Um, I thought it was the best way to be a Christian and to help the most people. And then I got heavily involved in the church, a youth choir and youth group leader and teaching vacation Bible school and teaching Sunday school and leading Bible studies. And that's exhausting. That just became really exhausting.
And
And
which
so
denomination was
at one point, I was junior in college at that point. I just said, I'm just quit everything except going to church on Sundays. That was like a non-negotiable. I just quit all the activities because I felt like I was pushing myself onto the church to other Christians. And I was sort of telling God what I wanted to do without really asking him what he wanted me to do and just let that go. And that was a very important period in my life where I just let things come to me. I would still attend Bible studies of my college group and worship, and actually started taking a religious studies class at University of California at Santa Cruz. I was learning about especially 20th century American theology, Bonhoeffer, Barth, Tillich, uh, the deep mythology, Bultmann, all those people. Anyway, it was during that period that I felt like I got a genuine sense of call. It wasn't something that happened in an evening, but during that period, it was like, this is where I was felt I was being pulled toward now. Yeah, I can name individual instances, but the overall effect was it was a kind of a slow transformation over a period of months that settled in my heart that no, what I'm supposed to do next after college is go to seminary and become a pastor. Uh, Again, it's a mystery how that happened and why it happened. I do believe it was a divine leading. Even though I look back on my pastoral experience and think, well, you know, when you're a young man, you think you're gonna have a church and you're gonna grow it to triple and quadruple its size, and you're gonna become a speaker and you're gonna have a radio show and all that stuff. All that testosterone is flowing through your veins as a young man. All these dreams of glory. And I was, you know, I'm not gonna poo-poo. I mean, I had a very good experience. I was a associate pastor of an English-speaking church in Mexico City. I led a youth group. It was a very successful youth group. Then I had a small church in Sacramento. It was a good experience. But, you know, it's fair to say I didn't set the world on fire. I didn't destroy these people or I didn't destroy their faith. But that was a very important period of my life. I, I have a great empathy for the pastors and priests and the tensions and pressures they face. I think it's one of the hardest jobs given to a human being. And anyway, that was the other thing, that formative experience in college that led me to that pastoral track, which has been an important part of all my reflection since then, even though I left the pastorate to become a journalist. It really shaped me profoundly in terms of understanding, because as a pastor, people will tell you things they won't tell anyone else. and they'll invite you into their lives when they're dying, when their spouse is dying, when they've just had an accident, and you're there at very intimate moments, and you see. Well, the one thing I saw, I think, that was most profound to me was I was taught in seminary that when someone has a loss or someone's facing a crisis like a open heart surgery and they might not make it out of it, you're to be empathetic. Oh, that must be hard. I can imagine that's difficult. I'm sure you're questioning God or whatever. That's where you go. So what happened to me many times in the pastorate, I would take that sense. So one particular instance was particularly vivid. I was visiting our organist who was about to go into open heart surgery, didn't know if he was going to come out of it alive. He was in the room, he was in the hospital room with a friend, and I was there, and I did my empathetic thing as a pastor. And he just interrupted me at one point and said, "Yes, but our hope is in Jesus Christ, isn't it?" I just said, "Well, yeah, it is." And I can't tell you the number of times that happened to me where I did the empathetic thing, but the parishioner had a rock solid faith and was not worried in the least about what was going to happen to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not sure what that says about me or about the education I got. I mean, some people would say those people were in denial. Well, I can tell you they weren't in denial. They were just people of solid. I mean, they would even have this one woman, Lou, very deep faith, very devout member of the church, very active. And I had an intimate conversation with her at one point where she said, "Well, the one question I'm going to ask God when I see him is why did he take my 5-year-old son from me?" She wasn't bitter. It was like, it was a very sad part of her life. She had lots of questions about it. And when she saw God, she was going to ask him about it. In the meantime, she had things to do, prayers to pray, Bible studies to go to. That struck me as a really healthy honesty about oneself and one's feelings and the life of faith. So those were the type of experience that shaped me a lot. And it's through those eyeglasses that I ended up reading a lot of literature and reading a lot of theology and trying to understand how I was to be a journalist, for example. I
Well, I
always
think
felt
that's
when I was, go ahead.
Well, I think that's a great segue. I do have, I guess, one question. So, was there a particular denomination that you were working within in that phase of life?
Yes, so I was Presbyterian USA. It was there is well, for a while there was two Presbyterian churches, the Southern Presbyterian Church and the Northern. And the Northern was more liberal and the Southern was more conservative. They rejoined after a split during the Civil War. And actually, I was the first pastor ordained in the new denomination that included both.
Wow.
But it was still the mainline denomination compared to other smaller Presbyterian churches, a little more liberal than them. In fact, I was pastor of a very liberal congregation in Sacramento when I was there. So that was and whenever I joined after I decided to join the Presbyterian Church, the goal for me was, and this is a little different than a lot of Protestantism that I've discovered over the years, is my goal was not to kind of change Presbyterianism or change it in this way other than to love Jesus more, which struck me as not antithetical to Presbyterianism at all. Was to kind of live into that system, to live into that theology and let that theology shape me. So, but during the end of my stint as it was not my interest in changing people. If I was a Presbyterian pastor, my job was to help them to be a Christian in the Presbyterian color, in a sense, to help them understand the riches of the tradition. It doesn't mean the Methodists were stupid and the Baptists were stupid. They had some unique qualities to them that were very admirable, but we were Presbyterians. So what does that mean for a Presbyterian to live out his Christian life in a Presbyterian way that can shape him. A lot of it has to do with utter trust in the sovereignty of God in one's life, a more deeper appreciation of theology, especially as it comes down through Calvin and the other Presbyterian and Reformed teachers. And I knew things were happening to me, because even then I was beginning to have my own inclinations, I was being attracted to things more liturgical. I was being attracted to things that were less rational. And I remember I was leading a membership class during my last months there. And I was reading a section on what Calvin taught about. I can't remember exactly what the topic was, but I remember thinking, I got to prepare for this. I got to reread Calvin here. And I read it, and I read what the Book of Order said. And I thought to myself, yeah, I don't think I believe that anymore. But I felt it wasn't my job to go into that membership class and then say, this is how Calvin is wrong and the Presbyterian Church is wrong. I needed to go in that class and say, this is what Presbyterians believe, and this is what Calvin teaches.
Yeah.
That felt like the thing to do with integrity. That was the most thing I should do with integrity. I didn't say that I now believe this firmly and I will give my life to it, but they were going to become members of the Presbyterian Church, and I just wanted them to know this is part of what it means. Go ahead. I had the same experience later that I'll tell you about in another vein, but that tells you something about who I am and how I've navigated these shifts.
No, I love that. We actually normally would have a video here. I'm going to forego that. We don't have a video about you or your work. The producer said, well, we'll air your video, Wade, which is the trilogy of my story. There are so many similarities here. And so we're going to forego that video entirely. We'll just keep rolling here. But I want to bring out one thing that you mentioned and then correlate it to my experience. So you mentioned that you were the first pastor of this new unified denomination, which is amazing because splits happen and then splits of those, and eventually you don't even have splits, you have splinters, right? And my second book goes into, I think one blurb of it was walking across the shattered fragments, right, of a splintered denomination, because I resigned from the full-time ministry and became a lay pastor, and I didn't join either of the sides of the schism. But you mentioned that there were smaller, that the main body leaned slightly liberal, and then there were smaller groupings that were then more conservative. This is an interesting, I don't mean to label and care about whether one is liberal or conservative, but I also like to understand things. So is it true or fair that this distinction that you faced and how you handled it, which is to say, my role here is not to come in and be an iconoclast, right? And tell these people that I've now realized this is wrong, but rather, this is what the church teaches and this is what Calvin teaches, and you were fine with that. Whereas somebody else might have had a crisis of conscience and not done that, but that might lead to further splintering where everyone is caught up in their view and what they think is right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably we're kind of jumping toward the last part of it. It's one of the reasons I eventually became a Catholic, because, well, I'm kind of losing my train of thought here, but
we can come back to it.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. Yeah.
So we'll put a pin in that, and we'll go then. So you became a journalist, and so was that. So you made the decision to go ahead and continue in your role and what the church was wanting you to do and perhaps paying you to do, but then you left and became a journalist. Tell us about that transition.
Well, I started writing for a magazine that was published by Christianity Today called Leadership Journal. It's a journal for pastors, and I had a very difficult. I took up writing when I was a pastor, associate pastor in Mexico City, as a way to kind of express some thoughts that were not appropriate for a congregation, because a lot of times they were more theological than I would actually end up using in a Sunday school class or that sort of thing. And I had, even though I had a very early, one of the first published pieces I ever published got published by Christianity Today. I went through this long period where I got nothing published by anybody for any reason whatsoever. Finally made a breakthrough because of the help of a friend. Started writing regularly for leadership. They started giving me more and more responsibilities, book review section, even though I was, not on staff. And then this was one of those experiences, again, that's a mystery to me, but it was clear. It was with clarity that I understood this. I had been asked to apply for the job of associate editor of the magazine at one point in late winter. This would have been 1988, I guess. And I turned it down. I said, well, if I were to get this position, I would be moving to Chicago in the middle of winter, and at that point, I would have a 1-month-old baby along with 2 other children. I just don't see myself doing that. Well, that spring, one of the editors of the magazine was at a pastor's conference with me, and he said, that position is still open. If you'd like to talk to Marshall about it, he'd like to talk to you. He was the editor. So I got on the phone with him. I was at the Mount Hermon campgrounds, not far from where I became a Christian, literally 10 minutes away. Anyway, the point of it was that we talked for a while, and I hung up the phone. And I felt, as soon as I hung up the phone, I said I knew I was going to the western suburbs of Chicago to become an editor. Hadn't talked to my wife, hadn't prayed about it, hadn't weighed the pros and cons. It's, these sort of things happen to everybody once or twice in their life. I just knew that's what was going to happen next. And that's when I made that shift. And so we moved in the summer of '89. And I said to myself, well, of course, a wise person would say, I'm going to try it. And if it doesn't work out, I know I can be a pastor, and that's something I know how to do and I enjoy doing. And I think God wants me to do it. But after a couple of years, I just said, no, in fact, I demitted I just turned in my ordination. I demitted because for me personally, being a pastor means pastoring a church. And I was no longer pastoring a church. I could keep my reverend credentials and get a tax break from the government, but that didn't seem right to me, because to be a pastor meant to pastor people in a congregation, and I wasn't doing that. So I demitted and I became a layperson, I guess is what you'd say. And that was one of those situations where I stepped in there, and in the entire time I was at Christianity Today, that would be 30 some years, 32 years. I haven't done the math right now. I never sought a promotion. I never asked for a promotion. I never asked for more responsibility. They just kept on giving me things, asking me if I wanted to do X, Y, or Z next. So I went from associate editor to an editor of a smaller magazine, which I absolutely loved. Was my favorite job of all time. The editor of a magazine called Christian History. Just a wonderful magazine. From there, I was asked to consider becoming managing editor of Christianity Today. And I went into the interview really going, I don't really want this job. I don't know if I really want this job or not. It doesn't matter if I get it or not. And I gave the most frank assessment of the magazine. I said, the magazine to me is boring. The magazine leans way too much. It's way too interested in progressive evangelicalism. It disdains conservative evangelicals, which I think, if we're Christianity Today and we're a magazine of evangelical conviction, you should be doing a better job of including evangelicals left, center, and right in this. So I gave a pretty scathing review of what I thought the magazine. The next day, how would you like the job? So I felt they wanted me to do the job with those opinions. I said, fine, I'll do that. And then
So
eventually I was asked to go ahead, and then I just naturally became editor-in-chief over a period of time after the current editor-in-chief. So I feel like that was a pull again, not of my doing, not of my will. Forces outside me were just pulling me along a certain path. That has some pluses and minuses as I look back on it, but certainly as an experience, I felt like that's what, in a lot of ways, what God wanted me to do during that whole time. Even though toward the end of that time, I really disliked the job immensely. And I only stayed in it because I was firmly convinced that I was supposed to do this by divine mandate, so to speak. Yeah.
yeah, that's an interesting one. We'll get there. I want to backtrack a little bit. So 30 some years, 30, 28, 30, 32, somewhere in that range, 30-ish or more than 30 years. That's a long time.
31, I guess. Yeah. It comes
Okay, so
eight.
three decades plus. You saw a lot of change. And so first unpack for me in the audience, because I've thought of Christianity Today as a monolith, as one magazine. It sounds like it's much more than that. It's a company with many vehicles.
Yes. Yeah. So at the time, it had a marriage magazine, Marriage Partnership, had a women's magazine, Today's Christian Women. It eventually took on Church Law and Tax, which is about the business side of ministry. It had Leadership, which was for pastors. At Campus Life, it had something for youth. So for a while, it had 8 or 10 magazines. During the heyday of magazines, which this would be the 1990s, it was just doing superbly. And it started an intellectual journal called Books and Culture as well. So it was an era when magazines were still flourishing, and you could start a magazine and people would subscribe, and it was easy to get advertising. That changed during the early 2000s as the internet became more and more active, and you know that story. Everyone knows that story. And it became an increasingly difficult thing to support financially. But so in terms of the business of the magazine, that's how that changed. I don't know. I think one of the things I regret is that Christianity Today has always been a magazine of people who didn't want to be fundamentalists. It was started by Billy Graham, and it was for conservative evangelicals who wanted to reject fundamentalism. So that tone, that's why they had such a difficult time dealing with Southern Baptists. The magazine had a difficult time dealing because they were more conservative.
From their outset, they were distancing themselves from them.
Yes. The typical story of even a Christianity Today subscriber was, I was a fundamentalist, I was a super conservative, and then I read Christianity Today and I realized I could enjoy the arts, I could read the Bible critically, I could watch movies and try to understand them from a Christian perspective. I could read Dostoevsky, and I could read Nietzsche, I could read anybody and try to integrate that into my life. For those people, it was an extremely freeing magazine. It was a wonderful blessing to them. The problem is that notion just kept on pushing itself more and more, right. So that by the time I left, it was just a thing among Christianity Today, especially staffers, to really be disparaging of things evangelical in general. They were trying to move away from mainstream evangelicalism now. Right, not just fundamentalism was a long distance. Now it was mainstream evangelicalism. And we wanted to become more, a lot of people more progressive than thou. And well, I think, go ahead.
No, the word today is a moving target, is it not? 30 years of Christianity
well, yeah,
today.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So not that I have any beef with progressive evangelicals. I think, my thing was I was editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, which should be a ministry to progressive evangelicals, centrist evangelicals, and conservative evangelicals. It was just harder and harder to get people on staff and to appreciate conservative evangelicals, and less to moderates, because we're beginning the period of extremism, and I think I was still pastoral at heart, and I wasn't willing at times to draw
you knew
lines that I
these
now wish I
people.
did. I wish I would
You,
have drawn more lines.
you knew these people. You knew that they were following verses like "work out your own salvation with fear and trembling."
Yeah, yeah.
So, quick question to sort of level set. In the view of Christianity today, if we think of it as a brand when you joined, and I'm now getting this picture of an editorial bias from one place towards another place. Fair, nothing wrong with that. Calling itself Christianity today, one can assume that's a natural thing. But how would Christianity today have defined fundamentalism? When you say we were this, not that, what is it about the thing that they weren't? Because you could define fundamentalism in a variety of different ways.
I think in general it was fundamentalists were more suspicious of and more hostile to the today. What's going on in the movies today, what's going on in the culture today, what's going on in literature today, what's going on in the arts today.
Yeah.
Even though some very conservative evangelicals like Francis Schaeffer did a marvelous job of introducing his readers to how to read, meaning how to look at and understand modern art, even though it was deeply secular, deeply pessimistic. But for the most part, yeah. And so the evangelicalism that Christianity today was trying to represent was this openness to all these things that are churning in the culture right now. Now here was the you could see where the bias came in, because I think that's a wonderful way to be. It's to what's going on in our world today, what's going on in our faith tradition today that we need to pay attention to. And when the conservative evangelical movement started to embrace Trump and became increasingly identified with conservative politics was as important, if not more important to them than their personal relationship with Jesus Christ. My instinct as an editor was, what's going on with that? How do we understand that? What is attracting people to that? Why are they substituting conservative politics for their faith, even though they still say they're born again Christians? And I wanted us to have some approach that group, that part of our audience, with some sympathy and understanding, and say, not they're stupid for thinking that. They're the basic stance of members of the staff and people were they're compromising their faith. They've sold out to politics. They're becoming hardened to compassion for the immigrant. They're just wrong. And I'm thinking, I happen to think they're wrong, but I want to know, what is it in the culture right now that's moving them in that direction, and how does that integrate and does it not integrate with their faith? But that conversation, that was a very difficult conversation to have. There was no understanding. There was no willingness to even try to understand it, because to me that was part of today. That is what was happening in 2014, 2015, 2016. And among the people that read Christianity Today and were on staff, it was like, there was this. It was the devil. Yeah.
So an observation. Curious to your reaction to this. What comes to mind as you're talking about that is the Yeats poem, "The Second Coming," and a quote from that poem: "The center does not hold." Right. So Christianity Today, in my view, was playing a role in this, because they were moving consistently, decade after decade, in one direction, leaving people behind. You came from this first pastoral experience of a denomination that had reunited, that had taken two sides and managed to get back together. But here's, a major vehicle, and not just a single magazine, but a conglomerate of magazines and public thought that is consistently moving from one side to the other. And people that weren't moving along with that ended up isolated. So one reason to try to, grasp for political power, if indeed that's what's happening, and I think it's fair to say that is one of the things that's happened, is to try to force a course correction when it feels like, the whole country is, running like lemmings off a cliff in the other direction. So, because everyone thinks they're right and everyone has reasons that make sense to them for what they do.
Yeah. I read during that time, I read J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy. I read another book by a UC Berkeley, very liberal woman, UC Berkeley sociologist who went and spent a couple of years living in the South during the heyday of the Tea Party era, trying to understand, and this is what I wanted to do in the magazine, just to try to understand where these people are coming from and why they're making moves that they're making. And she did a marvelous job of just helping me as a reader go, yeah, I disagree with what they're doing, but man, I sure feel a tremendous amount of empathy for why they're doing it.
Right.
She said toward the end of the book, one of the things that was frustrating for people when she gave this analogy, she said more than one person identified with this. I feel like we were in line in America to get our share of the goods and blessings of the American life. And then all of a sudden, I find there's lots of people cutting in front of me. And I'm being pushed further and further back. Now, you can argue about whether that was actually what was happening or that was a good thing that people were cutting in the line. But that was their existential frustration, anger, and dismay that I needed to understand, and that when we're dealing with them, we just need to understand that. And she did a fantastic job. Her last name was Russell, and I can't remember her first name. Something about strangers in their own land or something like that. It was just, so that's to me what part of today was, but it was not going down with the core readers and the staff in general. Now, here's the ironic thing. Even though I published or wrote many editorials during that period saying our churches should not be defined by our politics, left or right. The churches I tried to uphold were churches that had people left and right, Trump supporters, anti-Trump people, and who would get together for prayer meetings and discussion and talking to one another instead of past one another. But then I wrote an editorial because part of my job was to speak out forcefully to the left, to the center, and to the right, as I felt was important to do so. So I wrote this editorial when Trump was going through his second impeachment hearings. And at first, I didn't want to make any comment at all about it. I just thought, oh man, I'm just not going to go there. In fact, I was asked by a religion news writer, are you going to comment on the Trump impeachment? I said, no, not going to do that. And then I had second thoughts. I said, okay, well, the magazine actually has confronted this twice before. There were the Nixon impeachment hearings, and there were the Clinton impeachment hearings. So let's see what the magazine said during those. And I realized I was being a coward, that we had spoken out forcefully during each of those impeachments, and that if we just ducked our head during this one, we would be neglecting our responsibility. So I came into the office, and I talked to my associate, or one of my associates, and I said, whose opinion I deeply trusted. I said, do you think I should write an opinion on the Trump impeachments? And he goes, yes. So I had about an hour and a half before a meeting, and I just hammered out something because it's something I've been thinking about for a while. And it was very critical of Trump as being a person with deep character flaws, to say the least. And then I mentioned, for any evangelical to support him without blinking, I mentioned that, yeah, you might want to support him because of his policies. Yeah, of course. But to not recognize the deeply flawed nature of his character, and the character of a politician, the character of a president, has been very important in the history of the magazine and how it's written its editorials and understood its stance. I happen to think it's a little I look at in retrospect, I think it's a rather naive way to look at your political people, but it is a dimension anyway. So I wrote it from that perspective, a hard-hitting editorial, and I think I said the title. In fact, my associate basically gave it a title of "Trump should leave office." I forget. It was very dramatic. Oh my gosh! And I don't know if your research you saw this, but this thing exploded. I figured it would be controversial in our world, but it was picked up by every news media. I was being asked to do things on CNN, interviews on CNN, and the Sunday morning talk shows, and we got thousands of letters, and we lost 3,000 subscribers in a couple days. We gained 9,000 subscribers in a couple days.
Right.
But I was known as the guy who was anti-Trump and part of the progressive wing. And all the super progressive evangelicals who had kind of lost faith in Christianity because it'd been still trying to be too centrist would write me letters of how great it was and how they were going to give up on evangelicalism, but now they're renewed. But I was the same guy that was writing editorials all along also that said, even though we need to speak forcefully to one another, that was a very important part of my history in Christianity today. It happened 2 weeks before I was going to retire anyway. Many people thought I wrote it because it was my swan song and I was going to let people have it. No such thing. It was like, no, this was what I was called to do on that.
It was a responsibility you had, and you fulfilled
your responsibility. And I wrote, I will say, wrote more forcefully than I normally write, but not way over the top. It happened to be my associate editor said,
I'm sorry.
It happened
I don't like to do this, but I'm going to do this. I rarely ever do this. I tell my guests, don't look at the comments. I have to share this one.
You're wearing a red shirt. Exactly. I'm a communist at heart. Very funny. Very, 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 very funny comment. Yeah.
Well, so, wow, this is, I don't know what I was really expecting out of this interview. This is unexpected. We've done it without commercial breaks just because I'm so grateful and I'm fascinated just listening to you. There's so much going through my mind and my heart as I listen about my own journey, my own experience. I'm going to now kind of try to crash land this plane a little bit as we're running out of time, and maybe if you're willing, we'll have you back. But you said something earlier about this feeling of a calling and a mandate from God, and that's something that I had. And in my trilogy, I go through this, and I've had people. So I think you recall, because we talked about this, I was part of the Worldwide Church of God. When you talk about magazines, we had the Plain Truth magazine, right? 10 million circulation globally in 7 languages. It was a free magazine, but still it was substantial. We had the #1 rated religious show on radio for decades and on TV for a while in the 80s. Garner, Ted Armstrong, and Herbert Armstrong. Many would consider this a cult. You probably were familiar with it, at least back in the day, yes. Seeing it. And but the church split right down the middle, and I was caught between these two divisions, and I didn't want to join either of them because I had come to see that the sign of a true Christian, in my view, was John 13:35. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, that you have love one for another. And if we can't even get together as Christians and believers in Jesus and followers of Jesus, if we can't even agree, how on earth can an independent outside third-party observer, aka all men, by this shall all men, and we include women in that, by this all people shall know that you are disciples of Jesus,
yes.
The sign of love. But we can't even,
No.
We're divorcing and splitting and splintering. And so I then was a lay pastor, and I continued to try to sort of chew on this and figure it out. And I spoke actually in different versions of this splintering. I was invited back because I was the first pastor in Estonia for the Worldwide Church of God. I was invited back by a denomination I know it was no longer part of, that was part of the schism, because I was a peacemaker. I was always like, why couldn't we all just get along? And wouldn't it be great if we could? But we couldn't. So I'm chewing on this, and I realized it was this thing about a calling. It was my view that, again, I was personally chosen by God to do this thing. And I saw this in other people, that each one of us had this fervent belief, this unadulterated belief, this pure and coming from a good place belief. But at the same time, we kind of couldn't see what was right in front of us and what we were causing by the way we were going about that calling, which is why I was, impressed when you said, look, I realized my mandate at that time was to go in and tell people, this is what the Presbyterian church teaches, and this is what Calvin teaches, and let people decide for themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm bringing us back to that point because you mentioned that earlier. So I want to get your take on this, sort of from the retrospective of 30 plus years at Christianity Today, but also as a pastor and your entire walk with God.
I'm sorry. What are you asking?
This idea of the calling and mandate, because for you it was kind of a big moment. It wasn't it was an inadvertent mic drop, if you will, when you wrote that article. You were fulfilling a responsibility.
I was doing what I was supposed to do. Yeah.
Right.
But
then there was fallout. How do you view all this today?
So, part of it, I view it as God's mysterious hand working with us, in spite of us, because of us, all at the same time. And my own thing is, I have had at various times a sense of call, what I'm supposed to do next, what I'm supposed to do now. And like you say, it's kind of like, you can't tell me anything, but it's an internal sense of, this is what I know. What I'm doing now with my retirement years, I feel very profoundly called to do. It's way different than writing. Has nothing to do with writing. Has anything to do with being a pastor or being in being in church committees or anything. Okay, but it's that same sense of, this is what I'm supposed to do now and for the next 10 or 15 years, as long as I have the ability to do it. And to me, I know some people say, I've never felt that. I have nothing to say to them, good or bad. I say that, well, then you haven't had that experience. I know I have. It's been a very important part of my life. I haven't always say that I've been faithful in that calling. I'm not kind of say I've done it well. Sometimes I've screwed up really badly. But it's still in the middle of that. It's like, okay, you screwed up really badly. Keep going, because you're supposed to do it. Or at the end of my time at Christianity Today, because of the nature of journalism in general, I can literally say I hated the job. I absolutely hated it. You can talk to my wife. She said I would but the thought of quitting was like not there, because I felt like I hadn't been given that, the evangelicals have the language of, I wasn't released from that yet. I had no sense. I could have gone and got another job, but I felt like, no, that's not what I'm supposed to do. I know I'm doing good here with the staff, and I know I'm doing some good with the readers, and I'll just do the best I can. And so I don't know where that comes from. I don't understand it. Maybe I'll meet the Lord and he'll say, what were you thinking? I wasn't telling you to do that. You blind SOB. It's like, oh. But for now, there's nobody who can convince me that it's not a divine leading in some way. So what can I say?
Well, another image that came to mind as you were talking about writing that article was King David, right? King David certainly had character flaws, right?
Yeah.
And then you had this scene of Nathan the prophet coming to David, and the way I pictured it in my mind, I know it wasn't like this, but this is kind of my caricature of it. Nathan pointing a bony finger and saying, "You are that man, David." And in any other story about a king, that prophet would have lost his head.
Exactly.
But instead, David showed his true inner character and just said, "I have sinned." Was there any sense of that maybe somebody could get through to the president on some of those flaws? Because there are those who would feel, based on certain policies, or maybe even that he has a divine calling at this point in our nation's history. Clearly, 100 million or so people support him, right?
Yeah.
I forget how many votes he got when he lost to Biden. I do recall the number for Biden was about 81 million, because one of the shocking things was Obama in his second term only got like 63 million votes. And this is one of the, reasons why people doubt that, is that suddenly you have 81 million votes out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
And Trump got, a few million less than that, but still a lot of votes, right? So a lot of people think, for whatever reason, he's there for important reasons, but then you do have other things that you would hope would be brought to his attention, he might see. What was your take on any of that? I'm sure you weren't thinking,
Well,
I'm like the prophet Nathan. I'm the one drawing that analogy, but I'm just curious.
well, I mean, one of the things that's always a tension when you're dealing with a person who's as controversial as Trump is that what should be your stance should be you just be uh, I can have nothing to do with him, and I can have nothing to do with people that follow him. All the way up to I am a fervent believer in him, and I think God's called him, and I need to give my life to him. So those are the two extremes that I
Right.
think are probably inappropriate. But there's a lot of evangelicals in the middle who think, I know that he's a deeply troubled man. He's a deeply immoral man. I do like his policies, and maybe if I stay connected with him and his movement, I can have some influence to shape that movement. In his particular case, I think that's naive, but I get the reasoning. There were people in Nazi Germany who tried to live that middle line between rebellion against Hitler and trying to assassinate him, and others who tried to remain in the Nazi party and in the German system to try to shape it for better ends. Well, history proves that they weren't able to do that. So I get the desire to be a force for influence in problematic areas, and I can't fault it because the motives are good. But
Well,
sometimes our motives are
I think there's a big delta between Hitler and Trump as well, just for the record.
yeah. No, of course. And
Yeah,
I did not mean to imply that he's a
I
new
know, I know, I know. I just thought it
I'm
was
just trying to
important to make the
put
point.
myself in a situation because
Yeah.
I've studied a lot about German history, and I've just thought, what would I do? And
Perhaps we
something
might use
as
perhaps we might use Nixon as an example, or even Bill Clinton, who was a wildly popular president and yet was also a deeply flawed man. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
whatever. Yeah. Thank you.
When you get in politics, it's always crazily mixed up the things you have to do in order to stay close to power.
Yeah.
There were a lot of evangelical pastors who ministered to Bill Clinton, famous evangelical
Yep.
pastors like Bill Hybels from Willow Creek, among others. And they were, from an evangelical point of view, is you want to be because Billy Graham was close to Nixon. He was close to, uh, which got him into deep trouble. But there's this instinct among evangelicals that you do have a ministry to people in power. And if they invite you to have prayer with them or to have Bible study with them or counseling with them, there's a strain of evangelicalism that says, yes, I will do that.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I would, so Jesus certainly kept company with some people that were questionable in his day as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so people will
Anyway,
often wonder, well, did you tell him how he was, they would ask the pastor who spent some time with, did you tell him how wrong he was on this issue or that issue? Did you confront him? Did you? Well, that's the big thing on more progressive evangelicalism. You have to speak truth to power, truth to
Right.
power. It's
Right.
like, well, yes and no. How do you do that? When do you do it? Yeah, if you just treat truth to power, pretty soon people are not going to listen to you at all. So that doesn't work. Saying nothing to power, that doesn't work either. So you have to find out what the road in between of those two things is.
Which brings us back to that verse that I cited earlier: "Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling."
Yes.
And Matthew, we talked about Matthew, right? And very early on, hey, guess what? Matthew is all about judgment, and the central point in Matthew 7, verse 1, which says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." Talking about rule. Here's my sort of take on all this. Talking about rules and legalism and obedience, and especially where I come from, if you know anything about the Worldwide Church of God. Well, the truth is, what I take away from the book of Matthew is whatever standard of judgment you use, that's how you're going to be judged. God isn't going to call you on the carpet over some arbitrary rule. He's gonna weigh your own say do ratio, right? Did what you said you should do match what you actually did? Because what did he say about the Pharisees? They sit in Moses' seat, so listen to what they say, but don't do what they do, because they say one thing and do another. And when it all comes down to Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats, when the Son of Man returns in his glory to judge the nations, he will separate them like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, based on their hypocrisy, right? And the standard of judgment is pretty much the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Did you clothe the naked? Did you give water to the thirsty? And at a national level, is this what the nations are doing? Right. So anyway, but my point is, it's God's judgment of the rulers of the land and the nation. Of course, we have to make a personal judgment, because in a democracy, we have to cast a single vote.
Yeah. Yeah.
Each of us casts a single vote, for better or worse. Hopefully, we cast a single vote, right? There are theories about multiple votes and dead people voting.
And sometimes that you live in a state where your single vote matters whatsoever. So an issue that's very important to me is a pro-life issue.
Yeah.
But I live in Illinois, and my little vote doesn't make a bit of difference here, because we're just overwhelmed with the other point of view. Let's put it that way.
Well, so we're crash landing. We are officially crash landing the plane now. I want to give you the opportunity. I might find one or two comments, but to formulate your thoughts on what do you want to leave the audience with? What words do you want to share, from your current vantage point, from not Christianity Today, but Mark Galli Today? What do you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, what I hinted at in a previous comment was, I think I spent most of my life in a search for truth, which is a really good journey to go on. I studied theology. I tried to apply that truth. And I would say I also tried to apply goodness in how I live my life, how I encourage other people to live their life in the pursuit of truth, theological truth, philosophical truth, biblical truth. Those are all very important to me. That's why I wrote a book on Barth. I wrote a book on St. Francis of Assisi. I wrote books on holiness. I'm at the stage of my life now, though, the third part of the transcendental. There's truth, goodness, and beauty. And that's the path I'm on right now. I've just taken up art, charcoal drawing, and watercolor in my retirement years. And I'm giving myself to that with the same ferocity and the same dedication I would give myself to writing and to reading Barth and Bonhoeffer and all manner of theologians and philosophers. I hardly have time or interest in reading any of those people, not because I'm bored with them, or my passion is, I'm reading a book called The Eternal Embrace of Beauty right now, which is a good summary of kind of where I'm at, where I am just fascinated with beauty and what can I do to participate in that beauty, and what can I do to maybe create some things that other people might consider beautiful. And that to me is the kind of the transcendental triad that philosophers and theologians have talked about, and I'm on the third journey. So my closing word is you kind of have to live in the part of the journey you're in right now, whether it's goodness or whether it's truth. But don't be a fool like me who saved up the beauty part for the last part of my life, because now I look back and think, how many opportunities I missed by just ignoring that. On the other hand, it isn't like I had a choice. It was like my mind was just moving toward truth and goodness. I was totally captivated by that, loved it. I had books and books and books, read most of them. So anyway, that's whatever, however that sums up this. So it'd be interesting, to talk more about that. I think one of the reasons I became a Catholic because it has if I can speak pejoratively, I just think it has a greater appreciation for the beauty part than any other Christian tradition, as far as I know. It has a great history of it, but it's just part of the fabric of being a Catholic is to participate in beauty and to love beauty and to build beautiful cathedrals and to make beautiful art. So that's part of the reason for my turn there. The reasons, of course, for any conversion are very complex, but that's certainly part of it.
Wow, that's
another
really,
whole episode.
no, I love it. One of the things that's going through my mind is this show, when I launched it, was done in conjunction with a gentleman named Dan Sanderson, and interestingly, he's a philosopher, and we have somebody here from YouTube. I thought this was a philosophy channel. Well, this particular channel was never a philosophy channel, but certainly that was part of it. And then he further said, "Why the shift towards religion now?" And I find your shift fascinating in this context of your view of religion is this pursuit, not just of truth now, but of beauty, which is an expression of truth, maybe in a different way. In fairness to him, I'll conclude with his third comment here. Nothing I fear more ardently than religious people, especially the U.S. We have a variety of people watching and listening, so thank you for those comments. But I actually kind of love the fact that you ended on this on the topic of beauty for today.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Hopefully we've created some beautiful conversation, triggered some beautiful thoughts. I certainly have learned a lot and thoroughly enjoyed hearing you share your experiences and your perceptions with me and with the audience today. We didn't go to any videos. I do have one that I have to show, and that is the sneak peek for next week's guests.
Okay.
Final call though, Mark, if you have anything else to add for today, I will extend an invitation to have you back if you're open to it and interested to continue the conversation that we started here today.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you so much. If you want to, you're welcome to stay right after. I'll still be here in the studio. We're going to quickly go to the sneak peek for next week. For everybody else that's been tuning in tonight, thank you. Share this with your friends. As I always like to conclude, you are created in the image of God. That's the title of the show. And God loves his creation. Here's what you can look forward to next week. We'll see you there.
Next week on Created in the Image of God. Sunday, August 2nd at 7 a.m. U.S. Central Time. Host Wade Franson interviews Mandy Smith, pastor, author, and ministry leader. She reflects on the strength found in human limitation and how vulnerability can become one of a leader's greatest gifts, from weakness and dependence to discovering God's power through faithful, everyday ministry. And then on Tuesday, August 4th at 8 p.m. Central Time, with host Wade Franson, a special tribute to John L. Esposito. Wade reflects on the life and legacy of one of the world's leading scholars of Islam and Muslim-Christian relations, from decades of scholarship and public dialogue to the lasting impact John made through his pursuit of understanding, pluralism, and peace. Join us live this week, Tuesday and Sunday, Created in the Image of God.